when we look at this era, the real contemporary of Sandow was, of course, George Hackenschmidt. Probably the strongest man was Louis Cyr from Canada.
Louis Happolohinu is a massive icon in sport in France.
In Sandowina's case, we have people's remembrances about how she struck them.
He empowered people to look after their bodies, get fit, improve their mind, and change their lives, and that's a great gift.
I think all of these strength legends have this desire to express themselves physically, presenting their muscularity and their strength in creative ways.
The fact that they were not just competing on a standard barbell meant that they had to find ways to demonstrate strength that the public could identify with, and that at the same time they could marvel at.
He was very modern in his exploitation of lighting. He had a posing box in order to show himself off.
Now we're all trying to invent new kinds of movement activities, but we have such a fantastic, rich history where we can draw from that can inspire us in harmonic proportions.
We want to start with some early photographs of Hack today?
Yeah, I think so.
If we looked at time periods, I believe this is shot by Anton Huber out of Vienna. So it would have to be one of the times when Hack was in Austria competing in a tournament. Very, very late 1890s, 1898 through 1900. As you look at the next two, these are both just great, great photographs of an athlete. I mean, he's got such grace and power. We see very few of those today. We see, they are once in a lifetime. You see once in a lifetime athletes. And here's a man that would have excelled in weightlifting and wrestling.
To all demands for strength, speed and endurance, I found myself able to respond successfully and almost by instinct. The suggestions here on the sincere desire that they may be the means of assisting man in the facing of his difficulties and the permanent enrichment of his life.
Tartu on kõnetanud läbi oma tublide kodanike alati maailma ja Tartu on kõnetanud läbi Hackenschmidti maailma.
This region where he lived, they were an active people. And he really believed if there was one great secret to athletic superiority, it was heavy lifting. He felt this carried him on.
When Robinet faced Hackenschmidt, he said he was like being put in a vice grip. It was overpowering.
If you go on the internet today and you type in George Hackenschmidt, there are people talking about the hack squat, talking about Hackenschmidt training methods, people who want to debate whether, Hack is better or Gaucho is better. Jack Curley, who was one of the biggest wrestling promoters of that era, contends that Hack was always the best.
He was maybe a man that comes along every 500 years. He did these remarkable jumps that no one could do. And many people through his life saw him do it. And the last time when he was 75 years old, he was anything but normal.
Meie Tartu üks väljapaistvaid poegi on olnud Georg Hackenschmidt, kes on sündinud 19. sajandi viimases veerandis ja see oli aeg, kus Eestis, eriti Tartus, kõik õitses. Minu nimi on Urmas Klaas ja ma olen Tartu linnapea. Tartu on väga sportlik linn ja loomulikult Hackenschmidti terved eluviisid ja sportlik eluviis on loomulikult just nimelt see Tartu, millena me Tartut tunneme ja teame.
Vaata, meie väike rahvas ei saanud kohe lagedale tulla mingisuguste tipp-baleriinidega, dirigentidega, ooperilauljatega, aga maarahva pojad, nagu me olime, füüsiliselt olid tugevad ja esimesed eestlased, kes üle maailma kuulsad said, olid meie suur kolmik Lurich, Aberg, Hackenschmidt.
We had those great trio from past, and like Hackenschmidt, Lurich and Aberg were like every kid's idols. My name is Gerd Kanter. I'm from Estonia. I'm an Olympic athlete. I have 11 championships medals, including Olympic gold and World Championships gold. We have very big traditions in wrestling, weightlifting, shot put, discus, events that are very suitable for Estonians.
Hackenschmidt ja Lurich ja Aberg, need on näited sportlasest intellektuaalist. Nad kirjutasid artikleid, nad kirjutasid raamatud, nad olid valgustajad.
If you look at his book he wrote called The Way to Live, parts of it are about where you find the courage to keep training, where you find endurance. In 1913, he's in Paris. That's where Hackenschmidt met Rochelle Blondeau. She was only 17 years old at the time. She, of course, is really young. He's in his 30s, and she had no idea who he was. But one day they are down on the streets, and she sees a newspaper, and it has his photograph in it. And he has his shirt off, because she's never seen him, of course, except in a suit and tie. And there he is in his wrestling tights, and she has no idea. And they've been going out this whole time.
Ja mina olen Euroakadeemia professor ja hiljuti tuli mul trükist välja raamat Lurichi jälgedes. See on siis raamat Eesti rastijõustikust, maadletest, aga üldse kogu Eesti spordist alates tsaari ajast kuni tänapäevani välja.
Olen seda raamatut lugenud ja tõesti, mis mulle kõige rohkem selle juures meeldib, on see, kuidas moodi kõikide nende sportlaste juures on just välja toodud nende nii-öelda laiem mõju ühiskonnale ja kuidas moodi kõik need suured spordikujud, kes sellel ajal olid just eelkõige oma füüsilises tugevuses, olid nad rohkem kultuuritugevuse nii-öelda edasikandjad.
The most important rooms here in Estonian Sports and Olympic Museum are telling us about the first athletes in Estonia. And now we are in the room where our tour begins normally, dedicated to our strongmen, our Estonian strongmen. The most important athletes were Georg Lurich or Georg Hackenschmidt, who was also born in Tartu. He started to train here. And we have training equipment, which is also from late 19th century or early 20th century. This is how they trained. And of course, wrestling was one of the most successful sports for Estonians.
Hackenschmidt was born in 1877. Growing up as he did in Estonia, of that region of Russia, he always had a great fascination for and a hunger for, almost a need to exercise. We know that when he was 13 years old, he could lift a 44-pound weight over his head 21 times, completely off the charts. Soon, almost right away, he was lifting weights that none of the grown men, who'd been training for 10, 15 years could do. He finally decided he would go to St. Petersburg, which at that time was the home of Dr. Krajewski, who was a famous physician to the Tsar. He asked him to disrobe so he could see his upper body development. Krajewski was just astonished at what he saw. And so to be there in that kind of an environment and be among those other men and have somebody like Krajewski say, you can be the strongest man in the world, it would have imparadised his mind. Within 2 or 3 months, he actually broke several world records in weightlifting. He broke Sandow's record in the bent press. He just never seemed to have reached anywhere close to his limit. One day he was training, just going through some drills, and he tore the muscles in his right shoulder very badly. It was so serious that it primarily paralyzed his triceps of that arm. So there's no surgery for that. But he could never lift heavy weights with 2 hands anymore. That finished his weightlifting career. But he understood that he could become a wrestler and he could make a living. And so that's what he chose to do. There was no one making big money as a strongman. There were a few. Sandow was one. Louis Cyr was another. But there were a lot of people who wrestled professionally and made a very good living. Some of them a really good living. And so some of these men finally started talking to him and said, you have this gift. And so you just need to learn how to wrestle. What grip he could take that would allow him to pull someone down and roll him over for a pin, or a bear hug, just grabbing somebody and just squeezing them until they gave up.
The first thing, sizing up opponent, he would have tried to on a Greco hold, because that's what he was most comfortable with. From there, it would have been a half Nelson. That's what I'm almost positive, that's what he would have used to turn him. He used that almost exclusively. My name is Michael Murphy, and I like to be considered as an amateur historian and collector of heavy athletics from the time period prior to the start of World War I. Dear Mr. Aston, I hope these replies will satisfy you. All the best wishes, George Hackenschmidt. And you can see it's written in George's handwriting. And he would have been on the attack. He wouldn't have been on the defensive. He was always on the attack. I don't think he feared any opponent. I don't think he did. All of them were amazed at his strength.
There was one time in St. Petersburg when Paul Pons came. He was the greatest of the Greco-Roman wrestlers of that day. He was 6 feet 6.5 tall, weighed about 260. He got out on the mat with Hackenschmidt, and Hackenschmidt beat him.
Minu arust siiamaani Eesti esimene ametlik amatöörspordi tiitlivõitja, Euroopa meister. Ja see kõik inspireeris meid ja nagu tõmbas kaasa, siis me mõtlesime ise ka, kuidas nii või naapidi tugevamaks saada, aga Minu nimi on Jakob Proovel, olen Tartust ja tegelen Maaülikoolis maadustreeninguga. Hackenschmidti jõuharjutustest, mis meid nagu kaasa tõmbas, oli just see, kui ta Tallinnas oli sangpommidega, 2 puudastega, läks üles Olevesti kiriku torni. Ma ei oskagi öelda vast, et tõusmine tuli 100 meetrit, aga ikkagi 2 kahepuudast pommi kaasas, see pidi jalgadele mõju avaldama.
He did a lot of his training, like getting ready for the big matches in the south of England. He had played London a lot. He loved the British. His thought was not, well, let's go back to Estonia, like that's my home. His thought is, let's go to England, because that's where things can happen. One of the reasons why I think Hackenschmidt is somebody who is truly singular in the field of wrestling and physical culture history is because of the enormous amount of publicity that he produced because of who he was.
This is August Robinet, and these you can tell these are cabinet cards that are in St. Petersburg, and they're a part of a series that, again, they're illustrating Greco-Roman moves, French wrestling. I was at that time almost unknown to the general public in France, and everyone was astonished to see me defeat the popular Robinet in the short space of 4 minutes. Robinet was too sportsmanlike to attribute his defeat to accident, but in answer to questions said that I was very strong. He has a grip like a vice, and if he gets you on the ground, you are done for. It was about this time that people began to call me the Russian Lion, and that's in 1899.
I know this nickname was Russian Lion, and that was probably because in that time Estonia was part of Russia. Yeah, I know he was undefeated like 10 years in a row, 3,000 matches. That's something to look up to.
He didn't need to have a heavy arsenal of tricks. He didn't need to beat people quickly, decisively. You look at the length of his matches, they were fast. Fast. He was beating guys quick. You know, he was overpowering them. He was just too strong for them.
I think the fact that he would genuinely take on all the wrestlers, he would go to competitions, and the competitions were for the money. And if you didn't win the competition, you didn't get the money. And so that made you a very genuine wrestler. And the wrestlers themselves all respected Hackenschmidt for this.
Arvata on, et kui rääkida nüüd amatööride maadlusest, no siis seal ei olnud veel trikitamisega asju ja võistlus toimus ilmselt rohkem füüsilise jõu ja no selle arvelt.
If you look at the size of the trap, that neck into the trap, in his shoulder, he looks almost like a wolf, doesn't he? Look at the thighs through the glute, judging a man through his back where his strength are. Look at that deltoids. I don't care about the size of his arm, but look it up and through the traps in the neck. Look at the erectus. Oh my God. There's nobody like him.
Because he became so quickly the greatest wrestler in the world. In my view, Hackenschmidt was the outlier's outlier.
Raho, as you were growing up, you grew up in a household where you probably knew the Hackenschmidt name, and you heard the Hackenschmidt name a lot. What was that like for you?
He kind of has always been there for me. After George Hackenschmidt passed away, my father still corresponded many years with Rochelle, and this is also from her already written to me. So I really grew up with Hackenschmidt. I am Raho Langsepp. I am from Tartu, Estonia, and I am a musician, researcher, and Tai Chi instructor.
You wrote him off and on. You were correspondents for maybe till he died.
Yeah, 10 years, about 10 years.
But you never met George?
No.
Not in person, no. Because you were here in what was then Soviet Union.
But it was impossible to go out from Soviet Union in those days.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a very, very different world then.
George Hackenschmidt sent all his books to my father, but this one has a special dedication together with a photo. In a way, shows how important this book was for George Hackenschmidt. The fact that the world's championships in the Greco-Roman and catch-as-catch-can styles of wrestling were achieved by me with very little training was a source of speculation not only to many observers, but also to myself.
And the only time that he really faced an opponent that he couldn't beat was when he decided to go to America from London and face Frank Gaucho. The Gaucho Match I've written about as a historian. And I wrote about it because there are historians who've taken both sides on that match. And in reality, it was one of those matches that was kind of a defining moment in the history of sport because it did several things. For one, the promoters exploited the nationalism of it. And so even though he was living in London, we had this Russian, and he's going to take on Frank Gaucho, the American hero. Gaucho is this farm boy from Iowa who grows up rough and tumble, who is not an educated man. So his life is all about small-time carnivals and the struggle for all that. And he is the best exponent of a system of wrestling called catch-as-catch-can.
In Greco, it's throws. In catch, it's a combination of throws and leg tackles. The object is to pin the opponent. That's what it comes down to. So these are some of the moves that would have been used in Greco, and you notice there's no holes below the waist. Nothing.
For the most part, American wrestling continued to be more like grappling or like the old form MMA. Gouging, scratching, these kinds of things were not necessarily acceptable, but they were not uncommon.
Greco was dying in the music halls. The people wanted a new style with the punching and the slapping and more of a free-for-all, I think, in the U.S.
When Hackenschmidt agreed to take the match, he would have rather fought Greco-Roman style, which is what he did best, but he agreed to the catch-as-catch-can match. He also understood, because it's a title fight, that there were going to be rules in place and all of that. And so then when the match began, and there were all these evidences of things that were outside the rules, when he would sort of ask the referee, well, I can't hold him because his body has been oiled, for example.
Ja me teame ka, et näiteks kui kaotas Lodžile Hackenschmidt, siis ta kaotas paljugi selles, et tema kui nüüd Euroopa ja niisugune Inglise gentleman, siis sattus nagu Ameerika pinnal kokku ka sellega, et vastane määrib ennast mingite õlidega ja juuksed on seal bensiinilõhnalised ja et ikka käib võitlus elu ja surma vahel ja tehakse ka sohti ja ei ole fair play'd.
But the rules were completely ignored. Hackenschmidt was wrestling for the proper styles of wrestling, all the rules, and he stuck to the rules. But Gaucho was fouling him left, right, and centre and getting off with it. And Gaucho was twisting his legs and twisting his arms and really forcing him to go down. And then he said, I'll break your leg. And Hackenschmidt had to flop on his back to save himself because the guy would have done it.
He doesn't lose it, he forfeits it. That's the big difference. He forfeits. It's a match you can't win. After an hour and 45 minutes, when you can't get the guy on the mat and all it is pushing back and forth and trying to grab an oiled opponent, and you're getting scratched on the head, your nostrils ripped, you're getting punched in the face. I mean, you know, you're the champion. You're coming to Chicago to win. You're the recognized champion. It's for the world championship.
The way that the press then interpreted the match was fascinating. Pretty much everybody, by the way, in the papers agreed that Gaucho cheated, that he was doing things that were traditionally considered outside the rule. The British press, on the other hand, and a number of American newspapers, including the Chicago papers, actually who had people there watching it, I mean, there are reports from those papers that clearly indicate that there was a fixed referee and that Hack was wronged by what had happened there. But it went forward. And so, for many Americans, Gaucho emerges from that bout as a great hero because he has beaten the Russian, he has held up American pride, and even though he has used trickery and chicanery and all that, what that really indicates is America can-do attitude.
It really was a shocker to end, but it didn't do anything bad for Hackenschmidt's reputation because everybody just loved him.
He didn't like to be put in a bad light. He wanted to do the right thing and be seen to be doing the right thing.
Hackenschmidt, when he goes home to England, everybody's feeling very sorry for him, and they like the fact that he was noble and that he didn't cheat and he didn't do the same kind of thing. So in some people's eyes at home, he's this kind of wounded hero. He is the honorable man who makes the right choices, but subsequently kind of loses.
Nii et nad olid meie maarahva jaoks nagu ka meie rahva europiseerijad, tsiviliseerijad, mismoodi näeb välja rüütellik maadlus, džentelmeni sport ja kõik nii.
And so after the 1908 fight, it's a big disappointment to him. He would have liked to have that title. And then, of course, as always happens, we'll have a rematch. And so finally, when they have the second match in 1911, again, the nationalism in the press is just all over the place. But he gets injured before the match starts. He has a very bad knee injury that happens a couple weeks out. He does it in training. He describes it in his autobiography as he hears champagne corks going off in his knee. Pop, pop, pop. It's, of course, 1911. So they put hot water on it. They put heat on it, which of course we would now do exactly the opposite thing. He has a contract with Jack Curley, who's the manager for that contest. There's enormous money on the line. Curley has put up his own money, and Curley is a man who's one of his close personal friends.
This is a photograph of Jack Curley. That's autographed by him. He was so indebted to Jack Curley, George was, and he knew that once he was hurt, that if he didn't go on with the match, Curley would lose a lot of money, a lot of money. And I think that's part of why he continued with that 1911 match.
And so he takes the match. He really can wrestle only on about one leg. He ends up, of course, losing the match. Again, the referee won't make the right calls to make the match fair, and so he quits, and he gets up and walks away. And he is embarrassed by that because he is a man of integrity and honor, but he couldn't be the professional athlete who doesn't play by the rules. Many people regarded him as the sort of victor. They didn't think that Gauch had won fairly, but at the same time, you still don't have the title. And that's the last match of his professional career. But following that match, he didn't want to face the papers. He didn't want to talk to anybody about it. He wanted out of there. And so as soon as he could, after the match was over, he jumped a train and he got the first boat he could get out of New York City, which was a ship to France. He just left and really dropped out of sight. When life sort of returns more or less to normal, he and Rochelle, they buy this farm in the south of France. They're living down there. He's writing his books of philosophy, and a neighbor came to tell them that there was going to be a radio announcement that night about Hitler invading. They realized that France was going to war, and then they were trapped, and they couldn't get out. So they spent the duration of the war there in the south of France. This is the period when he actually started thinking philosophically and trying to figure out how the world worked.
His philosophical ideas, the main purpose of it is to achieve the better connection with the environment, with each other, and to live a more harmonious life. He was not at all talking in the terms of how to win better a match but how to be a better human being.
I believe this is the New York Times, so this would be 1938 to promote his books on philosophy. Reluctantly and with a heavy sigh, the old Russian said in a gentle voice, "Well, I was never a wrestler. I wrestled. I was the champion, but I knew nothing about wrestling. I could never learn the holds. I knew no tricks. Those other men, they were wrestlers. I was merely too strong for them and too fast." Then that match with Gauch, I suppose they still wonder about that.
If I were to speak about Tartu, I think the first word that comes to mind is statues. The men in the statues always are portrayed as heroes. There is no such statue for the great Hackenschmidt. It's because he is not viewed in quite the same way by his countrymen. Because once he left Estonia, he never lived there again. I think that's slightly resented, perhaps. But there is now a move afoot to have a monument made for him.
Here's the design that me and Krista Lalliksaar did about half a year ago for the Georg Hackenschmidt monument competition that we won.
It's going to be in a very prominent place right by the river in the downtown area, and it's right where Hackenschmidt used to live.
It is a place for home. Most of his life he was traveling and living abroad, but he probably always had like this picture of his home in his head. with many people like Hackenschmidt that you don't know maybe anything about them before, and then you get immersed into their kind of life and career and you're just so amazed.
Ning ma usun, et just nimelt selline avatus, edasipürgimine, rahvusvahelisus ja samas ikkagi selle kodukoha tunnetus, kus sa oled võrsunud, et nende väärtuste tähtsaks pidamine on oluline ja kindlasti ka Hackenschmidti mälestusmärk neid väärtusi endas kannab.
Ma arvan, et sporditähed, kes on Eesti ka spordimaailma kaardile jäädvustanud, näiteks Georg Hackenschmidt, et nende roll on kindlasti suur ka eestlaste rahvusliku identiteedi ja rahvusliku uhkuse loomisel ja säilitamisel. Näiteks mälestusvõistlusi, näiteks Georg Hackenschmidti auks peeti ka siinsamas Tartus Nõukogude Liidus. Need rinnamärgid ongi tehtud Hackenschmidti mälestusvõistluste jaoks.
I think the single most important contribution that he makes to us is that he is the first really successful athlete who is known as a weightlifter. He is the first man, in a certain sense, to indicate that heavyweight training will not hurt you in doing your sport, because his success as a wrestler all comes directly from the fact that he's stronger than everybody else.
Rääkides näiteks Hackenschmidtist, no kuulge, me oleme idades uhked selle üle, et Theodore Roosevelt ütles kohtumisel Valdes majas Hackenschmidtiga, et kui ma poleks olnud president Roosevelt, ma tahaksin olla teie härra Hackenschmidt. Idale mehele niimoodi ei öelda.
Hackenschmidt tried to inspire and educate other people to do sports, fair play, nutrition, training. So all those messages have been, I think, accepted pretty well.
Hackenschmidt oli tavaline inimene. Ta ei olnud minu arust kekutaja või enese nagu esile tõstja, aga minu jaoks oli ta ikka kõige tavalisem inimene, kõige lihtsam Eesti poiss ja töötas ennast üles.
He became a legend because he was such a great fellow. People talked about him a lot with admiration. People would go to see him because of this. And he's one of the few whose reputation has lived on over the years.
Throughout my whole career, I have never been bothered as to whether I was a champion or not a champion. The only title I have desired to be known by is simply my name, George Hackenschmidt. And that's how the book closes. That's his story. Amazing man.